Okay, everything that we did before had the same signs, if you haven't noticed. So now we're going to look at some examples that have different signs. So when we have different signs, I have a positive 15 and a negative 7. So I have different signs. I'm going to subtract. 15 minus 7 is 8. The bigger number is positive, so my answer is positive. For number 2, I have a negative 8 and a positive 12. Different signs, so 12 minus 8 is 4. The bigger number is positive, so my answer is positive. Now let's look at this one. I have a double negative that I want to change to a positive, so I'm going to rewrite this as negative 6 plus 4. Get out that double negative because it's just confusing. Now we're looking at just one sign. So I have a negative 6 and a positive 4. This plus, just like the negative up there meant, the minus meant negative, the plus 4 means positive. So I have a negative 6 and a positive 4. Different signs. I'm going to subtract. 6 minus 4 is 2. The bigger number is negative, so my answer is going to be negative 2. Now for this one, I have a lot going on. So I'm only going to look at it 2 numbers at a time. The first 2 numbers have a double negative. So I want to rewrite this as negative 16 plus 3. And I'm going to go ahead and bring this down. And if you want to bring this down, instead of writing plus negative, if you want to bring it down as minus 11, you can. If you want to bring it down as plus negative 11, you can do that as well. Either is the same thing. So looking 2 at a time, I have a negative 16 and a positive 3. If I subtract 16 minus 3, I get 13. The bigger number is negative, so my answer is negative. I want to bring down that minus 11. Now I have a negative 13 and a negative 11. The same sign, so I'm going to add and keep the sign. So my answer is negative 24. So we've had examples with the same signs. We've had examples with different signs. Now we're going to go to something new. Finding the opposite of a number. Now we already talked about double negatives, so we've kind of already discussed this topic. But now we're talking about it without more than one number. We're only looking at one number at a time. So that means that anytime you see a double negative, that's the same thing as a positive. So if I have positive 22, that's the same thing as just 22. If I have a double negative for here, that would be a positive x, so that just would be x. C. This is tricky. We know that anytime you have absolute value, it's the positive form of that number. So this is how I explain this to my students in class. If I know that negative 2 is 2, remember when we had to compare and we had to work the absolute value first before we can do the less than or greater than? This is going to be the same idea. I know that the absolute value of negative 18 is 18. Then I have to bring down that minus. This is not the same thing as having a parentheses where you have a double negative. I have to work the absolute value first. Once I work that absolute value, I'm going to get a positive 18. That means I don't have a double negative. I only have that one minus sign out in front. So this answer is negative 18. So be very cautious when you're doing opposite of a number versus absolute value with a negative out in front. It's totally different and it could be confusing. So just remember to always work your absolute value first and you shouldn't have any problems. All right, the last thing that we're going to talk about in this section is evaluate algebraic expressions using real numbers. Now this is the exact same thing that we did last section where we substitute in values for variables. So they tell us that x is negative 5, y is 2, and z is 3. So anytime I see an x, y, and z, I'm going to substitute those numbers in for the values. Or for the variables, sorry. So I'm going to substitute in a negative 5 in for my x. And I'm going to put parentheses just so you can see where they are. I'm going to say negative 5 minus, and instead of a y, I'm going to put a 2. All right, so let's look and see what we have. We actually have negative 5 minus 2. So that means I have the same sign, a negative 5 and a negative 2. So I'm going to add and keep the sign. So my answer is negative 7. Now our second example, I'm going to have negative 5 squared because instead of an x, I put a negative 5. And I have a z in parentheses. So this is like having negative 5 times itself twice, minus 3. So negative 5 times negative 5 gives us a positive 25. And negative 3 just comes down. Now this, I want you to mark. Our next section is actually multiplying and dividing sign numbers. So just take my advice on the fact that this is a positive. When you have the same sign in multiplication, it's positive. We'll talk more in depth about that next section. I won't get into the details, but you will see this on your homework. So anytime you have a negative 5 squared, this is negative 5 times negative 5, which is a positive 25. And 25 minus 3 is a positive 22. I have different signs. I subtract. Take the sign of the bigger number. The bigger number is positive, so my answer is positive. The last one in this section is C. And C has absolute value. So I'm going to have the absolute value of, instead of an X, I'm going to put negative 5. And then notice that we have a double negative. I'm going to go ahead and change that to a positive 6 in that one step. So I changed my double negative to a positive. And on bottom I have 3 times y, and my y is 2. So I have a negative 5 and a positive 6. Different signs. I'm going to subtract. Take the sign of the bigger number is positive, so my answer is the absolute value of positive 1. Well, what's the absolute value of 1? Well, that's just 1. So I'm going to put a 1 as my answer. On bottom, 2 times 3 is 6. So my answer is going to be 1/6. Okay? And that's the end of 1.4 and 1.5.